The envelope had been sitting on Cade Lennox's desk for 4 days before he touched it. He recognized it immediately. The cream-colored stock, the gold-embossed logo of the Ainsworth Group, pressed into the upper left corner. He didn't need to open it to know what it contained. Rochelle Ainsworth had won the Meridian Award for Architectural Development, and she had invited him to watch her accept it. That was the kind of thing Rochelle did. She didn't just win. She made sure the people she'd outmaneuvered were in the room when she did. He finally opened it on a Tuesday evening, standing at his desk in his King Street office, with the city spread out behind him through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The card inside had a handwritten note. "You've worked too hard not to celebrate with us. I do hope you'll come. R." His jaw tightened. It wasn't an invitation, it was a reminder. His closest friend, Hugh, called that same evening and listened to the whole story without interrupting. "So go," Hugh said when Cade had finished. "Alone?" "Take someone then. Make an impression." It was the obvious answer, and it was useless. Every woman Cade knew in that world, the careful champagne and black tie world of Toronto's development circuit, would interpret an invitation to a gala as something loaded with meaning. He wasn't looking for meaning. He was looking for impact. He was still turning it over the next afternoon when he stopped at a café 2 blocks from his office. The place was unremarkable. Exposed brick, a chalkboard menu, the particular hum of a machine that hadn't been properly descaled in months. The woman behind the counter was writing the daily specials in precise, unhurried chalk lettering. And she didn't look up when he walked in. He ordered his coffee. When she handed back his card without meeting his eyes, he noticed the magazine tucked under the edge of the counter. A technical architectural journal. The kind of dense publication most people in his industry displayed but didn't read. "You follow the Meridian shortlist?" he asked. She looked up then. Her eyes were steady, light brown, the shade of worn timber, and whatever she saw in his face didn't appear to interest her particularly. "My father designed 2 of the buildings on last year's list," she said. "I try to keep up." "Who's your father?" Something shifted in her expression. Not pain, something more contained, a careful stillness. "Henri Rousseau. He had a firm called Rousseau & Associates." She handed him his cup, past tense. Cade knew the name. The dissolution of Rousseau & Associates, 4 years prior, had been one of those quiet collapses that barely made news. A sequence of lost contracts, funding quietly withdrawn, a firm's reputation turned uncertain by allegations that had never been formally investigated. By the time the industry had taken notice, Henri Rousseau had already retired from public life. "I'm sorry," Cade said. He meant it more than he'd expected to. She looked at him a beat longer than necessary, and then she went back to the chalkboard. He came back the next day, and the day after that. On the 3rd visit, he said, "There's an industry gala on Friday, an awards event. I need someone to attend with me." She set down the cloth she was using to wipe the counter. "Is this meant to be flattering?" "It's meant to be a business arrangement." "We've spoken 3 times. I know, I'd compensate you, enough to be worth your time." He named a figure. She didn't flinch, which told him something. "Who is it you're trying to impress?" she asked. He hadn't prepared for the question. "What makes you think there's someone specific?" "The way you said the word impact when you thought you were describing a gala." She tilted her head slightly. "You're not going for the event. You're going for an audience." He pressed his lips together. She was more perceptive than he wanted her to be. "Her name is Rochelle Ainsworth," he said. "Former business partner. She's accepting the Meridian Award on Friday." The woman behind the counter went very still. It was nearly imperceptible, a slight shift in her posture, something that moved behind her eyes and then closed off, like a door shutting quietly from the inside. Cade saw it and filed it. "If I come," she said, her voice unchanged, "you'll owe me a conversation afterward about what Rochelle Ainsworth did to your firm." "How do you know she did anything?" "You have the look," she said. "I've seen it before." She met his eyes. "My name is Thea Rousseau." He drove her to a boutique on Bloor Street the following afternoon and told the stylist what was needed. Thea sat in the styling chair and watched herself in the mirror with the focused, evaluating expression of someone who had no interest in being surprised by their own reflection. She didn't make conversation. She didn't perform gratitude. When she came out in a deep green dress, structured, precise, the kind of garment that announced quality without requiring volume. Cade understood that whatever her current circumstances, she had not always been behind a café counter. She moved through space like someone who had been taught, early, that how you entered a room was a decision. "You've done this before," he said. "My father used to take me to industry events when I was young," she said, adjusting one earring without looking at him. "Before everything changed." What changed? She looked at him and didn't answer. He had the clear sense that she was making a calculation. She hadn't finished making it yet. The gala was held in the glass atrium of a newly renovated building in the financial district. The sort of space that photographed beautifully and felt cold to stand in. By the time Cade and Thea arrived, the room was already thick with the quiet machinery of the industry. Developers and architects, city planners and design journalists. Everyone dressed carefully and watching everyone else. Every head turned when they walked through the entrance. Cade was recognized. He'd built enough of Toronto's skyline that his face was familiar in these rooms. But it was Thea who held the attention. Something in her manner, the particular ease of someone who already knew the room's geography and didn't need to prove it. Rochelle Ainsworth found them within 10 minutes. She was 50, impeccable, with the poise of a woman who had engineered her own ascent and then carefully erased the engineering. She wore black, as she always did, and her smile when she greeted Cade was the specific warmth of someone who had never once confused warmth with sincerity. "Cade, I'm so pleased you came." "Congratulations on the award, Rochelle." Her attention moved smoothly to Thea. "I don't think we've been introduced." "Thea Gerard," Thea said, extending her hand. Her voice was unhurried, her posture entirely at ease, her smile revealing nothing. "It's a pleasure." Rochelle held the handshake one moment longer than necessary, the pause of someone searching for a face in a mental filing system. "You look terribly familiar." "The industry can be quite small," Thea said pleasantly. "I imagine we may have crossed paths." Something moved through Rochelle's eyes, not recognition. Uncertainty, the first small fracture in an otherwise perfect surface. She recovered immediately, turned back to Cade with a social remark about the renovation, and moved on. But Cade had seen it. He watched Thea for the rest of the evening. She was not simply fitting in. She was navigating, knowing who to speak with, what to say, when to let silence do the work. When a senior partner from a rival firm approached and began asking about her background, she mentioned her father's name without hesitation. "Henri Rousseau," the man repeated, something careful entering his face. "Extraordinary work. What happened to the firm was a great shame." "It wasn't an accident," Thea said, the same pleasant expression in place. "The Lakeview Commission, his largest project, was redirected to a competitor after the design work was already complete. The documentation exists. The plans that were ultimately built from were not original." The man blinked. He looked at his champagne glass. He said he needed to find a colleague. Cade waited until they were clear of the crowd before he said, quietly, "Tell me about your father." Thea looked across the room at Rochelle, who was accepting congratulations with the grace of someone who had been practicing for years. "He designed the Lakeview mixed-use development from the ground up. 3 years of work. It was the project that would have established the firm for the next decade." She kept her voice even. Rochelle had a contact inside the development consortium. She fed them a story about financial irregularities, fabricated, but difficult to disprove quickly. By the time my father had the documentation to clear his name, the commission was already signed with Ainsworth Group. The design they built from was not identical to his. A pause. "It didn't need to be." "And after?" "The firm closed. My father had a heart attack 14 months later. He's been in physiotherapy for the past 2 years. She didn't look away from Rochelle. "He doesn't know I'm here tonight." Cade stood beside her in silence for a moment. "She did something similar to my firm," he said. "Contracts redirected. A senior architect who walked out of a meeting one Tuesday and never came back. Projects that appeared with Ainsworth's name on them 6 weeks later." "I know," Thea said. "That's why I said yes." Rochelle maneuvered Cade to the mezzanine level later that evening, away from the reception noise, and made it very clear she was not pleased. "That woman you brought," she said, without the warmth she'd worn downstairs. "She's not here by coincidence. You should be careful, Cade." "I'll take it under consideration," he said. She looked at him with the expression of someone recalculating. "You haven't changed at all." "No," he agreed. He called an investigative journalist the following morning, one who had been quietly discouraged from publishing a piece on contract irregularities in the city's development sector 2 years earlier. He asked her to look again. He told her what he knew, and he gave her Thea's number. They met for 4 hours. Thea arrived with a folder her father had kept, but never shown anyone. Correspondence, design schematics, time-stamped project files that documented every stage of the Lakeview development. Henri Rousseau had preserved them carefully, in the quiet, methodical way of a man who had once believed that evidence would eventually matter. He had simply run out of the energy to use it. Thea had not run out of energy. She had been waiting for the right moment and the right ally. Rochelle moved first. A brief item appeared in an industry newsletter, framed as a question about the intellectual property practices of the late Rousseau and Associates. It was subtle and targeted. It was a warning. Thea read it at Cade's office, set it down, and said, "She's frightened." "She's dangerous," he said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." Thea looked at him. "The journalist has everything. The piece runs Thursday. The article published in the morning." It was careful, documented, and precise. By noon, the Ainsworth Group's communications staff had stopped answering the phones. By mid-afternoon, 2 board members had called for an emergency meeting. By the following week, the city's architectural licensing body had announced a formal review into the provenance of several Ainsworth Group commissions. Rochelle's statement, when it came, was 2 sentences long. It announced an indefinite leave of absence. It was the statement of someone who had no better options left. Cade drove to the café when the piece went live. Thea was behind the counter at the end of her shift, wiping down the espresso machine. "You saw it," he said. "I called my father this morning," she said, "before it published. I read him the headline." She kept her hands moving, unhurried. "He didn't say anything for almost a minute. Then he said he'd always known I'd find a way. He just didn't know how long it would take." Cade stood at the counter and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed saying. Thea looked at him, the same careful, weighing look she'd given him the first time, the morning she hadn't bothered to meet his eyes. "You came back 3 mornings in a row before you asked about the gala," she said. "I did." "That wasn't about the gala." "No," he said, "it wasn't." She set down the cloth. "I don't have much to offer you that's straightforward, Cade. I don't have a firm. I don't have a network. I have a father in physiotherapy and a folder of old files and a job that ends at 5. I'm not asking for something straightforward," he said. "I'm asking for a conversation, and then another one after that." She considered this with the focused attention she gave everything. "There's a lecture at the ROM next Tuesday," she said finally. "Adaptive reuse architecture. My father used to bring me when I was 12. "I'll be there," he said. He was there. They stayed until the building closed. Afterward, they stood on the steps in the October air and argued about whether post-industrial conversion was an act of preservation or erasure. And Thea laughed once, sudden and unguarded, the first time he'd heard it. And the city moved around them the way cities do, indifferent and enormous, making room. It did not happen quickly after that. Thea was not someone who moved quickly toward anything she valued, and Cade was learning, slowly, that the things she valued she protected with both hands. But it happened steadily. Coffee becoming dinner. Dinner becoming the kind of evening that ended at midnight without either of them noticing the time. Conversation becoming the quiet kind that didn't need to perform itself. 6 months later, he walked into the café and found a note on the counter where she should have been. "I handed in my notice this morning. I have a meeting with a development consortium about a new firm. Don't be insufferable about being right." He was insufferable about it briefly. She forgave him. Henri Rousseau attended the opening of her firm in a wheelchair in the September sunshine, with the expression of a man who had been waiting a long time to see something, and was no longer surprised it had finally arrived, only grateful, quietly, in the way of people who have learned not to take a good thing for granted. He shook Cade's hand for a long moment without saying much. That said enough. And Cade stood in a room full of blueprints and renderings, and the careful, hopeful geometry of something that hadn't existed a year before, and understood something he hadn't fully understood when he'd first built anything worth building, that the most important structures in his life had no architectural drawings at all, had been built slowly and without fanfare, one honest conversation at a time, between two people who had each decided in their own way that something worth having was worth the patience it asked for.